Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode of Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts. In this episode, we look at the deadly Dubburke sisters. Parents want the best for their children, but what happens when parents give birth and raise a murderer? A parent couldn't think of anything worse unless they gave birth and raised two murderers, or in this case, sisters who were involved in murders. And the Dubberke sisters absolutely stained the name of their family. We'll start with Thekla. She was the younger of the two sisters and involved in a murder that was quite disgraceful. Although she wasn't the actual murderer, she was still involved in disposing of the body. This was in 1898. This story begins similar to one that we've had before, The Butcher of Sussex Street, where a young boy finds rather a gruesome discovery. In this particular case, a 12-year-old boy by the name of Frank Logan spent most of his spare time down at the Yarra River, and on this occasion he was out in a flat-bottom boat scouring the river for anything he could find, kind of like a scavenger or treasure hunt that young kids often play to find and locate different things and treasures. In this case, Frank Logan stumbles across something else. He'd been awarded previously for helping police find dead animals or dead bodies in the Yarra River. On this occasion, he was going to live up to his reputation. He noticed a yellow box, one that they would use for shoes or boots back at the time. A plastic box bobbing up and down in the Yarra River. It was near the bank of the river. He manoeuvred his way through the murky water over towards it, not knowing what he was going to discover. He manoeuvred the box around with a stick and saw two human feet. He yelled out to his brother Fred on the banks and told him to run as fast as he could to Richmond Police Station and get the detectives. Constables Kelly and Withers arrived and pulled the body out of the river. They took it into the back of a police van to the city morgue. Due to the compressed state of the body, most of it was white, except for the head that had turned black and was pretty disfigured now being in the water so long. They had a couple of things to go on. The fact that it was a young woman and she was about 150 centimetres tall, very slight and petite, as well as the box that she had been crammed into was inscribed on the inside with the name T.R. Atkins. So that was something to go on. The body had been weighed down by a sandstone rock, and that wasn't from the immediate area of the Yarra River, but somewhere a couple of kilometres away in the Richmond and South Yarra area. So they kind of knew a location. They decided the only way they'd be able to identify the body was to show the head to other police and see if anyone knew or had heard of this woman. When this failed, they showed the head to postmen in the area, thinking that perhaps they would recognise this female, and that failed also. The next thing that they had to do was place the head on display for the public. It was put in a liquor bottle so as that it would kind of be embalmed for the meantime before they would bury it. They had to find out who this woman was. Eventually, someone came forward. It was Thekla Dubburke. She used a friend of hers to go and contact police on her behalf, as she was very nervous about coming forward. When they hauled her into the police station after hearing the story from someone else, they expected to see a trembling girl who wanted to get something off her chest. Instead, Thekla was quite confident, and she only said what she wanted to say. She wasn't going to be pushed into any story. However, the initials that were on the inside of that box were hers. She was going to marry a Mr. Atkins and become Thekla Atkins, and they were her initials, and she didn't want her husband to be interrogated. So she was going to come forth and tell her story. When Thekla left her family home, where she had many siblings living with her parents, she worked as a maid for some time. But like many women around this time who were on their own, they found it easier to make money as prostitutes or women of the night. Thekla comes into contact with a Madame Olga Radulski, who was a divorced woman living on her own also in South Yarra. She was a fortune teller or clairvoyant at that time, although this was a front for her more sinister business, which was taking care of unwanted pregnancies or backyard abortions. These backyard abortions were nothing new to the police. There were many going on, as there were many prostitutes and other barmaids and women workers who were getting pregnant and not wanting the children. Adverts were placed in the newspaper for nurses and midwives, but it was also known that if you wanted an abortion, they would do it for a fee. And the police wouldn't get involved unless something went wrong. And this is where the story turns sinister, because this is the reason that there's a body in the river. Now, as Thekla tells the police at Richmond Station, she had nothing to do with the murder, but she was forced into helping because she was there. Now, this is where she turns Queen's evidence on the people involved. Madame Olga Radulski had a friend who was a real estate agent, Travis Todd, and he and his mistress, a Mabel Ambrose, came to Madame Radulski as their relations had produced a baby that they both did not want, and as a result, they wanted an abortion. Thekla, living at Madame Radulski's house, would be witness to everything that unfolded. Mabel came to the house without Travis to have the abortion done. They paid Madame Radulski to have it done, and she was going to perform this. At first, the usual attempts failed, and she had to up the ante. Now, to understand how she's doing this, we have to look at her past. Now, Madame Olga Radulski didn't always go by that name. She had the name of Elizabeth Elburn, or Lizzie, who was born in Adelaide and ended up being a barmaid, and her father had a hotel in Essendon. When they moved to Essendon, she met and married a Carl de la Dubburke. However, he wasn't who he was supposed to be either. He was an AFL football trainer for Essendon turned petty criminal. In one occasion, robbed a man, stabbing him a few times. He was put in jail for several years. Then he came back to Essendon. Lizzie and Carl travelled to Tasmania as well as into New Zealand, but eventually came back to Melbourne, where Carl set up shop as a medical electrotherapist, where he would electrify people for various ailments. He would also treat disease by hypodermic injection of organic liquids extracted from glands. He would also use serum taken from the unmentionable areas of dogs, sheep and goats and place them into people. So he was quite a weird Frankenstein type doctor. This is something that Lizzie Olga would watch intently and later on use in her own practice. It all came crashing down for Lizzie when she found him in bed with another woman, and she left him. While she was in Melbourne, they had a child, and after she left him, she had to support herself and this child, thereby creating a business herself and adopting this electrotherapy into the case with Mabel, resulting in the body in the Yarra. Geez, I wonder where her kid was while all this was going on. Now, it wasn't Madame Olga, who's now changed her name, it wasn't her intention to kill Mabel. She was simply performing an abortion that she'd probably performed many times before. But this one got out of hand. Whether it was the shock therapy or the LSD that she made Mabel take, something went wrong. They called Mabel's lover, Travis Todd, to come at once and assist with the body of Mabel, who is now very dead. Once Todd arrived, they had to work out how they were going to move the body, as none of them wanted to be implicated in the death. Thekla came up with the idea of grabbing her glory box and placing Mabel in it, as it was the only thing large enough that they could possibly get Mabel into, although she was only a tiny girl. Once inside, they carted it down to the Yarra River. Travis and Thekla, as Madame Olga Radulski was always complaining of ailments and could not possibly help them get the body down to the river, although she was only in her 30s, as was Travis Todd. Thekla was in her 20s, and poor Mabel was only 18. They had cut her hair off to make her look less identifiable. The poor girl was meant to be with friends in St Kilda on this fateful night. Her poor parents would have had no idea that this was going on. Once they got the body into the river, they weighed it down with a sandstone rock, hoping to never see it again. How wrong they were. Now that Thekla had gotten this all off her chest, the police stepped in to take custody of Olga and Travis. The trial lasted 4 days, with many spectators standing outside the courts to try and hear the verdict. Now, they were both sentenced to death. However, the public, as usual, had an outcry. This wasn't a straight-out murder, and everybody knew it. Everyone knew what had happened, despite the families wanting justice for their daughter. It was pretty much an accident, and Mabel went in there willingly, over the age of 18 now. She stepped into that home willingly, and this happened. Signatures were taken amongst the public to save their lives, and it worked. Olga, who was directly responsible for the death, received 10 years imprisonment, and Travis, who wasn't there but was an accomplice, like Thekla, of disposing of the body, he received 6 years. And Thekla, who turned Queen's evidence, was not charged. It appears that the house, 73 Osborne Street in South Yarra, has somehow disappeared off the map. It may have been demolished shortly after this happened. How curious. What a sad case, and very strange. But the strangeness continues when we look to Thekla's older sister Selena, and what happened just 4 years after this case. We know that Selena was Thekla's older sister, and in 1899, when it all went down for Thekla, Selena was 30 years old. When she was 21 years old, she married an Edward Christopher Sangol, who was a German immigrant and had been in the German Navy. He'd settled in the Dandenong-Keysborough area and owned a market garden. In 1902, they had 4 children, and she was pregnant with another. However, Selena wasn't happy in this marriage. He was a cold man, not very warm towards her, from accounts, and they had quite a large farm that needed some servants and workers on the farm. One of the men that was employed at the farm was an August Tisler. August Tisler was a Finnish man. He was of Russian descent but had been living in Finland. He was a deserter from a naval ship and came to Australia to live a new life. His real name had been August Sipol, and he found work at Edward Sangol's farm. Witnesses have stated that over the course of him working there as a gardener, labourer and farmer, he and Mrs. Sangol, or Selena Dubburke, had been having an affair, and it is believed that the baby that Selena was pregnant with was most likely August's baby. Once Selena realised this, she wanted to do away with her husband, Edward, and she spoke to August at length in order to get this done. Now, there were stories that state that August was seduced by Mrs. Sangol, Selena, and others say that it was a mutual affair, and that August often boasted about how much Selina loved him. Either way, it was going to end badly for Edward. They decided that he had to be removed from the situation. But how were they going to do it? They ended up employing a man, a Spanish man by the name of George Save, who they had come to the farm and inspect the situation to see whether or not he would go through with it. They offered him £10 up front with a further £100 once he'd done the job of killing Edward Sengel, and that way Selina and August could be together with her children on Edward's property. But it all went pear-shaped when they purchased a weapon, a gun, for Mr. Save. He said he would do the job that night. He left with the gun and the £10 that August gave him, but he never returned and sold the gun later in Melbourne. This posed a problem for August and Selina. They still had to do away with Edward, but they would have to do it themselves, and they came up with a plan. Now, you might wonder why Selina would want to do away with her husband, or why she became so unhappy. Selina was unhappy in the marriage as Edward Sengel was a cold man and didn't show much affection to her. She wasn't a very attractive woman from accounts, but she was confident and sure of herself, much like Thekla. She decided that if he wasn't going to show her affection, she would find it in others, and August may not have been her only affair. At one time, the house caught on fire, and August witnessed Edward come to Selina, blame her for the fire, drag her into the house, and start to beat her. Many other witnesses were around at the time and heard Selina screaming. Tisla went in to save her from the beatings, and a fight ensued. August was fired from his labourer, gardener, farmer job and left the property. And this is how it came about that Selina wanted to end Edward, not only because she may have been carrying August's baby, but she didn't love him and wanted August to move into the property. Now, the night of Friday, August the 8th of 1902, Edward was sleeping in the bedroom and August arrived onto the property. Selina took him into the house and gave him a heavy piece of wood in which he was to strike Edward, killing him, hopefully with one blow, although it didn't work out that easily. After August struck Edward in the head, Edward woke and started to fight back for his life. August at one point looked as though he was going to lose the fight, as Edward was quite strong. The children awoke to the noise and came to the door of the bedroom, which Selina stood in front of. The oldest child asking, "What is happening with father?" And he could hear Edward screaming, "Oh, Gus, Gus," as in August, and calling out for the children and his wife for water, while he proceeded to fight for his life. August had a knife on him and was forced to use it as the heavy wood didn't subdue Edward. He stabbed him many times, ending his life, but Edward fought so hard that August had to near sever his head to get him to stop. They decided pretty quickly that they had to dispose of the body, and Selina came up with the idea to throw him down their well. It was a long drop, and they could state that he committed suicide. Maybe the farm wasn't going as well as they'd liked, and they were finding it hard with money. She would make up some excuse as to why he killed himself. She left his slippers by the well after they hauled his body down it. What would she say to the children? At one point, while the fight ensued, one of the children wanted to enter the room, and she said, "No, there's a man in here that might hurt you." And this was stated at the trial later on. In order to keep the secret of the murder and to coincide with his suicide, a few days after the murder, Selina went into town and asked around if anyone had seen her husband, even going to the police station and reporting him missing. This spurred on a search of the property and the finding of the slippers next to the well. Selena at once stated that it must have been a suicide for him to throw himself down a well. The police searched the well and recovered the body. After doctors examining the body, they ruled out suicide straight away as to the wounds on the body. A nasty blow to the head, as well as his throat being cut from ear to ear, did not coincide with injuries sustained from falling down a well. Perhaps the blow to the head would be, but definitely not the throat being cut. And they knew it was murder right away. And of course, witnesses came forward, stating that Selena and August had been having an affair. And many assumed that the baby was August's. The two were charged for murder, after all evidence pointed to them, and witnesses, including the children, had been questioned. Now the trial was quite strange. August denied having feelings for Selena and stated that the wife pursued him and pushed him into doing such things for her because he was scared he would lose his job. He stated that he told her no on many occasions, but she wouldn't leave him alone. And when he was sent away from the job, he came back to finish off Edward. He admitted to killing him in the end, stating that he regretted doing so. Selena stated that she was innocent, probably after hearing how Tisla threw her under the bus, and she stated she had nothing to do with the murder. But unfortunately, the questioning of the children stated otherwise. Even the oldest child, David, stating that he'd seen Tisla put his arm around his mother the previous year. So it was confirmed that there was some kind of affair happening. And as a result, all eyes looked to Selena as the driving force for Edward's murder. Then came sentencing. They were both sentenced to death, but as Selena was with child, they could not hang her and decided to commute her to life imprisonment instead. August Tisla was hung. There was another court hearing later on about who would inherit the estate of Edward Sengel. It was decided that the children would inherit the estate and nothing would go to Selena. In the November after Edward's murder, Selena gave birth to a baby girl. The child, as well as the other children, were sent to live in a home, Miss Sutherland's Home for Neglected Children in Royal Park. Selena died at the age of 65 in Prahran. This was a very sad case. When you think about the children involved, it was awful for them to have witnessed, or at least heard, the death of their father. It is really, really odd that the sisters would both be involved in murders 4 years apart. And although they didn't actually commit the crimes by their own hands, it is very odd that two of them from the same family would be involved in such awful affairs. What was going on at the time? It's funny how Thekla told the truth and Selena lied through her teeth. There are so many strange and unusual stories like this, and we intend to tell you as many as we can find. We hope you enjoyed this episode on the deadly Dubburke sisters. Stay tuned for many more criminals, cutthroats and convicts.